So we're going to start the day with a bang. We have with us really, I would say, the godfather of the Hispanic effort and movement. And this is Dr. Juan Andrade. And he is going to kick off our day and share with you some of his thoughts and about the journey we're on and where we've come and where we're going to go. So without further ado, Dr. Andrade, welcome.
Thank you very much, Beth, and thank you all for being here this morning. You know, I had asked Claudia not to put me on the program right after her. And then when she said she wasn't going to be here, I thought, well, maybe it won't be so bad. But then after seeing that video, I tell you what, she is just such an inspiration and such a dynamic person that even on screen you don't want to follow her. But I'll do my best because I believe so strongly in what Claudia and We Are All Human Foundation have proposed to do and have been doing now for some years and doing it so well. And as the sun sets on my own career, now running 52 years, I'm glad that I have one more shot left in life to support something in which I strongly believe and had advocated for throughout my career. And finally, we have someone who can get us there. The dream that we had to establish ourselves in this country and to make our presence felt, we all worked at it within our different spheres of influence. We worked in building and creating businesses and working in government and corporations all over the country and just providing a workforce that is second to none to make our community proud and America to recognize who we are and what we bring to the table. And we have worked in all aspects of American society, hoping that someday we would get there and looking for someone who could get us there. I believe, without a doubt, that Claudia Romo Edelman is that person. And what the We Are All Human Campaign Foundation has proposed and put before us is something that will certainly get us there. At very least, I will die trying to help her fulfill that dream that many of us, colleagues of mine, have had throughout our lives. Most of my colleagues are now dead and gone. The people that I started out with in the 60s have all passed on for the most part. I'm one of the last ones around, maybe the last of the Mohicans, I don't know how you might want to describe that, but still, I'm going to die trying to fulfill this dream, this vision that Claudia has brought to this country. And what she is proposing to do in American society, the impact that she will have, I believe, will give us all something of which we can be proud. And it's a privilege for me to be here today and be part of this program in helping move this mission forward, because it is indeed a mission. To kind of provide, I've told you pretty much how old I am already. You can just add a few more years to the 50-some odd that I have been doing this, and that's how old I am. But all honesty, so you don't have to wonder, I'm 75 years old and have been doing this easily most of my life. So I have seen what many have not, where we were when we started. I won't go back to the 60s. I'll spare you the 70s, and I'll pick up in the 80s. Why? Because that was called the decade for Hispanics in America. Blacks, we had just celebrated Blacks for America in the 1970s. In the 1980s, people noticed us for a few reasons and declared that decade the decade for Hispanics. We all knew that the next decade has to be about women. So the 90s was the decade for women in America. And so going back to the 80s, that first decade, I want to speak to you this morning about something that was kind of alluded to in the 1980s and is now more commonly used. And it's an expression, a term called the Hispanicization of America. How many of y'all in this room are familiar with that term? A few of you? Okay. That's kind of what I figured. Most of us people today, our leaders today, quite honestly, weren't around 40 years ago. And they missed that whole time, that era of the 1980s. So if you'll allow me this morning, I'd like to move this conversation from the decade of Hispanics to today that we call the Hispanicization of America. And because as I would reminisce over the last 4 decades of my own USHLI experience, I realized more and more that probably today's leaders missed out on this time, on the first time that we referred to Hispanics in America. It was heard as in because of the impact, the emergent impact of Hispanics in American society. In the 1980s, sociologists and visionaries scrambled to come up with a term that would describe the phenomenon that was playing out in America. They called it the decade for Hispanics. And this just goes to show when they call it the decade for blacks, the decade for Hispanics, the decade for women, it just goes to show how shallow and naive an entire generation was when it came to understanding what was happening in America, nor realizing the vertical and horizontal shift, the width and depth, if you will, of the impact of these 3 groups, blacks, Hispanics, and women, would have well into the next century, let alone any idea what our impact would be on the new millennium. Everything Hispanic was catching on in America when they came up with that term, the decade for Hispanics, because everything Hispanic was catching on in this country, getting everybody's attention. Y'all may remember, those of y'all who are old enough, to think about Gloria Estefan and the Miami Sound Machine. They dominated the music world, and everybody was dancing to the conga. Y'all can Google that if you don't know what that was. But it had this whole country moving and shaking, following Gloria Estefan. And Andy Garcia, y'all may still remember him, seemed to be appearing in every movie imaginable. Westerns, dramas, The Godfather, comedies, wherever there was a screen, Andy Garcia was on it. Colombian writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. The Bolivian Irish-American movie actress Raquel Welch, who was born Joe Raquel Tejada in Chicago, revolutionized the movie industry in her portrayals of strong women throughout her career. Puerto Rican actor Raul Julia dominated the movie screens and the Broadway stage. In politics, Joseph Montoya was elected from New Mexico to serve in the United States Senate. Raul Castro was elected governor of Arizona. Jerry Apodaca was elected governor of New Mexico. Henry Cisneros was elected mayor of San Antonio, the first Hispanic Mexicano mayor of that city in 150 years. Federico Peña was elected mayor of Denver. Mauricio Ferrer was elected mayor of Miami. In sports, Roberto Clemente was considered the best baseball player in Major League Baseball. Anthony Munoz became one of the best offensive linemen in NFL history, playing 12 seasons, 11 times All-Pro, started 184 out of 185 games. Latino food was flying off the shelves in grocery stores. Salsa was outselling ketchup. Nachos were outselling hot dogs at baseball games. Tortillas were outselling bread. Everybody was buying our food. And it gave us all hope. Why? You know the old saying, you are what you eat. So that way, more and more people were becoming Hispanic by consuming our food, more so than even Hispanics in some places. Latinos were dominating every aspect of American society. Latinos had captured the imagination of the American people. That's why they dubbed it the decade for Hispanics. Analysts debated whether these trends and structural changes in American society would endure. They questioned, do they have staying power? Was it a phase or was it real, sustainable? By the end of the decade for Hispanics had evolved into the Hispanicization of America. The transformation of American popular culture had taken root. Without a doubt, the Hispanicization of America was underway 40 years ago. Here in the Midwest, we have an Hispanic population today of just under 5 million. That's about 10% of the total Hispanic population of the country, pretty close, 9%. We have 261 Hispanic elected officials. Our voting age population is 3 million in the Midwest. Of that number, 1.3 million are registered to vote. Hispanics have the political capability today to swing a presidential election with 88 electoral votes here in the Midwest. That's 30% of all the electoral votes needed to be elected president of the United States. Today, 40 years after the decade for Hispanics, we're talking about a different level of Hispanicization. Today's level of Hispanicization is characterized in totally different terms. Today, the percent of Latinos graduating high school is the highest ever. Post-secondary education or training is the new goal, especially among Latinas. We tell young single boys and young men that if you want to marry a well-educated, well-established leader, go to college. That's where you will find Hispanic women today. It's amazing what we're seeing, this explosion in the rise of what we call Hispanic Serving Institutions, HSIs. Ethnic and racial diversity is more visible on HSI campuses than anywhere else in America. Hispanic Serving Institutions are graduating the majority of all Latino students, and graduating three times as many blacks in America as historically black colleges and universities. When I earned my first degree, a little more than 1% of Hispanics had earned a degree. Today, it's closer to 15% of us who have at least one degree. We have 5 million Hispanic-owned businesses providing employment for hundreds of thousands of workers. Latinas are creating businesses at a rate 6 times faster than the general population, regardless of race or ethnicity, male or female. Hispanics created over 80% of all the new jobs in America during the last 10 years. Latino annual purchasing power now exceeds $2 trillion a year. The Latino GDP, the gross domestic product, is growing faster than the GDP of the United States. It is the third fastest growing GDP in the world, behind China and India. That's the Latino GDP. Almost half of all new homes in America are being bought by Hispanics, which means jobs for millions of carpenters, plumbers, roofers, electricians, bricklayers, landscapers, and many more. Latinos account for most of the workers today entering the labor force. Politically, Hispanicization has boomed over America over the last 40 years. Latino voter registration is increasing at a rate 6 times faster than the general population. Latino voter turnout is increasing at a rate 5 times faster than the general population. Hispanics now hold state-level elected office in 37 states. And if you include local office, city councils, and school boards, it's well over 40 states in America where Latinos have elected officials today. 40 years ago, we had only 1 United States senator. Today, we have 6, and more could be elected during this decade. 40 years ago, we had 7 Latino members of Congress. Today, we have over 40 serving in the Congress of the United States. 40 years ago, we had less than 100 state legislators. Today, we have over 350 serving in state legislatures across the country. It's just extraordinary what we're seeing. 40 years ago, we had a little less than 2,000 Latino elected officials in this country. Today, we have over 7,000 serving in public office today. Over the last 10 years, the Hispanicization of America has shifted gears, accelerated, and we have to shift along with it. According to the 2020 census, Hispanics accounted for 51% of the total population growth of the United States. That means that our population growth was more than all of whites, blacks, Asians, Arabs, and American Indians combined. That was the Latino population growth over the last 10 years. California was the first state, New Mexico was the second state, and today, Texas is the third state in a major state in the country where Hispanics comprise the largest ethnic and racial group in those 3 states. In 20 more years, By 2042, America will reach another milestone. For the first time in American history, whites will become a minority also. Not a POC minority, but a numerical minority just the same. For the first time in history, no ethnic or racial group will comprise a majority in America. And that's just 20 years from now. In just 40 years from now, the Hispanic population of los Estados Pegados will double in size to 120 million people. The Latino population will double in size to 120 million. How many is 120 million? Today, if you took 37 states and added their total population of 37 states, that is 120 million. That's how big we will be in just 40 more years. Think about it. We've talked about how far we've come over the last 40 years. This is where we will be in another 40 years, where y'all will be here, but I will not. But I'll be watching y'all grow. It's just amazing what is transpiring in America. Because when we get to that point, in 2060, there will never again be a majority group in America. Until 2060 and thereafter for the remainder of the century. Because the next majority group in America that is in any position to reach that level is the Hispanic community. The next majority group in America will be Latino. Latino children being born today will parent the future generations that will comprise America's new majority. Our job today is to get America ready for them. Invest in our young families and their children. They will be the future parents and grandparents of America's new majority. And they are already here, being born today. In their lifetime, in the lifetime of newborns today, America will become the most powerful Spanish-speaking country in the world. We already are the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. In the next 40 years, we will be the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. Can't y'all just see that? Just imagine the Hispanicization of America in all of its majestic glory. Believers like myself would say there is a God. We can all celebrate the Hispanicization of America that we had 40 years ago. But see where we are today and how far we have come. It's no longer about salsa outselling ketchup anymore, or nachos outselling hot dogs at baseball games anymore. And it's not about tortillas outselling bread anymore. It's about economic power that we're building. It's about the political power that Latinos are building in America, creating new businesses in this country with jobs for everyone, increasing our GDP, building a more powerful United States. Folks, our day has come. We are today America's future. So let's all join together as Latinos, Mexicanos, Puerto Ricanos, Dominicanos, Cubanos, Centro y Suramericanos, Latinos throughout the world. Let's join together and Hispanicize the world. We are one people, un pueblo, una gente, una raza unida. My friends, let's imagine, visualize, and make the Hispanicization of America a reality. Thank you all very much. God bless y'all. Que viva la raza.